delighted to be joined today by Peter Ward, who's Managing Director at WeTrack, alongside Eric Solem, who's Commercial Director at WeTrack. So thanks so much for being with us today, guys. First question, straight off the blocks. Obviously, you've just completed and launched a white paper, Best Practices for Event Control in the New Normal. And Craig Mathie, Managing Director at the Bournemouth Sevens Festival, said that COVID has to become something that sits in the matrix of the risk that we're facing rather than the sole focus. Perhaps you could expand on that, and is that a useful attitude perhaps that we should be taking as we get ready for the sort of grand reopenings across the UK this summer?
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for having us. It's definitely true that in terms of mental capacity and people's time is taking up a huge amount. So there is a bit of a waiting on that, but all the other risks haven't gone. The small ones, trip hazards and all that sort of stuff, things that probably more likely to happen on site, as well as the more dangerous terrorism and everything else, they're still there. Undoubtedly, the focus this first year will weigh on to the COVID stuff, but it absolutely just needs to be part of that wider set of risks which any event or venue has in its operations.
And Eric, what's when it comes to sort of giving advice to anyone working in event control for this summer, what would it be?
Well, I think, and as I said in the piece too, as best you can, prepare, and make sure you have audit trails and your team aligned to the outcomes that you're desiring. With the addition of COVID, there's going to be certainly some additional complications, but as Peter says, the same risks that are always there apply nonetheless.
And I would just add to that, Katie, try and have fun. If you're in a lucky position to be in an event control room this summer or later in the year, try and enjoy it. Don't get too preoccupied with everything. It's wonderful that we're allowed to do it again. So people have to be able to enjoy it and get back to having fun doing it.
And I think obviously there'll be a lot of eyes on the UK. They do seem to be a trailblazer for sort of Europe. Obviously I'm based over in Ireland, and we're not looking at events, or maybe pilot events from July onwards. So we're definitely all going to have our eyes trained over the water to see what you're doing over there. But when it comes to event controllers, do you think they're going to be facing a lot of COVID-related incidents, or do you think the COVID burden will mostly fall on the pre-event planning, the contingency planning and the testing side of things?
Yeah, so I think everyone in the event control room will certainly have a lot of questions around COVID. It will probably take up a disproportionate amount of the bandwidth of people looking for clarification, whether it's an incident itself in so much as someone is tested positive for COVID. Unlikely. It will, and that is a consequence of all the planning, and undoubtedly that's been the toughest bit for everyone, is all the planning that's had to go into it and the changes in planning. So one plan 1 month is different to the plan next month. That's very difficult. Event operators are very good at doing that anyway, but it's definitely heightened that, and I suspect that will be the main source of work for everyone in event control, is seeking clarification on certain items rather than an actual incident in the proper term of the word incident, unless it's someone refusing to take a lateral flow test beforehand, that sort of incident. So it's things related to the policies put in place around the disease rather than the disease itself, would be my suspicion.
And what would you say have been the biggest challenges that COVID's brought about, both for sort of event and venue managers?
Yeah, sorry, carry on, Eric.
Well, I think that, one of the big challenges, and it used to be a marketing challenge, but it's going to be an operational challenge now, is knowing exactly who's attended your event, and therefore the push towards digital tickets, mobile tickets, it's going to be mandatory, if not regulated, that we understand who's attended our event, with all the implications that testing and COVID brings with it.
Mm. Yeah, and here in the UK, we've had the word Brexit hanging over us for a long time, and everyone says the most difficult thing with that is the uncertainty. I think in the events world, nothing's certain anyway. So, there's never been certainty in putting on any event or show, but the unpredictability, I think, as I sort of mentioned earlier, the changes in plan, the changes in guidance, that change definitely takes its toll, and trying to adapt to it and put in the best you can towards those changing goalposts, essentially. I think that's definitely going to be a big factor.
And do you think, do event and venue managers have like a sort of big picture responsibility, obviously not only to the local communities around them, but to the world in general?
I think it needs to be put in context. I think us in industry think that we are doing an important job, and hopefully we are, and giving people some entertainment and other things to look forward to. Certainly the responsibility is not quite like being a frontline worker. So in moderation with a pinch of salt. But yeah, absolutely, there is, to make people feel like they can enjoy themselves in a safe setting, is valuable. And people talk increasingly around mental health and the strain that's taken. That's not going to be relieved by going to a festival necessarily, but it will be part of it. And to be able to congregate with friends and have drinks or food or do whatever they want to do, see things that they want to go and see in person, is going to help with that. So yes, there is a little bit of responsibility, but knowing all the event professionals I do, they relish that opportunity, and actually that's what they get out of bed for. So it's just getting back into that mode of allowing people to enjoy themselves.
Amen to that. I can't wait to get back to live. But how can venues tighten up their checks processes at a time when obviously regulations and scrutiny have increased exponentially?
I think what everyone's been talking about during the pandemic is the increased rate of digitization or digital transformation in business. It's the same for venue management. It's the same for, long gone should be the days of paper checklists and Excel spreadsheets. You need to have an audit trail. You need to have a proper system in place, if you like, to manage the whole process of planning and the execution of an event. And COVID's only increased that need for everyone.
Yeah, to add to that, making sure that the implementation, which is undoubtedly important, just making sure that those checks and processes are correct, and they're right, because they have changed, and how people were doing all of those pre-event checks and processes, a year ago or more than a year ago. A lot of those will still be valid. There'll be others on top of it, but some of those original ones have changed. So it's not like people can go back in. We've operated this venue with 50,000 people before, so doing it with 10,000 would be easy. It's not going to be easy, and it just needs constant evaluation that those checks are correct, and not just picking up the playbook from 18 months ago and running with it again and just adding a few to the end. Unfortunately, all of that takes a lot of time and a lot of work to go through it. With a team, a lot of people still on furlough, so making sure that you have the right time to go through those processes, and then actually how you implement them, as Eric mentioned, trying to get away from just having it on a notepad and radioed through. All of that together, I think, is probably the solution.
Yeah, and I was going to say that too. The additional challenge of having people have been on furlough and not being in the same room planning is just going to make at least this opening up over the coming months that much more difficult.
And sort of actually taking that piece a step further, sort of, I know we've heard from a number of the pilot and test events that, although like Wembley can host 90,000 for a 21,000 game, they needed more staff than they would normally have had.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to sort of easing staff fears, like you say, a lot of them have been on furlough for the last 12 plus months. So, how can event and venue managers, sort of work to ease the minds of staff coming back into the venues when it comes to the, COVID-19 piece?
Clarity of communication. That's all it's going to be, making sure everyone is clear on roles and responsibilities and they know what process has been put in place. Ambiguity will be the one thing that everyone wants to avoid. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of ambiguous stuff over the last year for many reasons. Again, that unpredictability part. But now something's coming closer. You need to make sure that your processes are good, you understand what you want to do, then that's communicated absolutely to everyone, so everyone knows exactly what they need to be doing, and maybe not have full visibility over the whole operational manual of that venue, but they need to make sure that they're very clear on what their roles and responsibilities are and what precautions have been put in place. I think as soon as you do that, you've just got to trust the skills and the training of everyone involved to kick in and go, yes, I understand what I'm doing. I'm excited to be here and to do it again. A few things have changed, but I'm clear and I'm confident that I can deliver what I need to do on the venue.
Yep.
And then, obviously pre-pandemic, unfortunately, terrorism, was the perhaps one of the key worries for event and venue managers. So how important will the Martin's Law legislation in the UK be, obviously, if and when it is passed?
Yeah, it's going back to that sort of first question of COVID in relation to all the other risks, and that undoubtedly is a big one. The legislation, I think rightly, is going to come through to make sure that there is the accountability and all the other stuff that it's trying to address. As that trickles down, or if it trickles down to venues of all sizes and shapes, and it remains to be seen what happens with that. That's going to add a lot of administration, a lot of effort to some of the smaller venues that might not have even considered it quite so much, because they might think they have a very low terrorism risk profile. But that is going to be very important, and it's going to be increasingly talked about, of course, over the coming years. And I suspect not just in the UK, but similar things will get rolled out to the countries that don't yet have them. So that's something that will dominate worldwide, I suspect.
And then, sort of what further resources would you be recommending to venues, that are just starting the reopening process?
Well, the white paper that we're publishing, we've tried to include as much as we could, and not just stuff about us, but outside links to what's going on with the latest recommendations in the UK, and even some tools to use to help people prepare. Yes.
Yeah, and look, we're sort of, I suppose, talking a lot UK. A lot of what we've spoken about is different country to country, and it's important to recognise that some have very different profiles in terms of the terrorism, or in terms of COVID infection rates, or anything else. So I think depending on the country, the government guidance, or the guidance coming from your local authority or equivalent, is going to have to be your first source. It's all very well for us to create stuff, but we can only give our thoughts and guidelines based on what we see widely. Specific guidance and resources is going to have to come from whoever is approving or legislating that event or venue in your local area.
And they're the big marquee events that are coming up that we all need to watch and see how they're handled. The Olympics, the Euros, they'll be the big tests that we'll watch and hopefully learn from, and hopefully everything will go well, and we continue to open up.
Great stuff. Well, thank you so much for that, gentlemen. It was a pleasure speaking with both of you. And, you know, I'm sure that, you know, we'll be keeping an eye on, you know, not only what the events and venue industry is doing, but, you know, what WeTrack is doing as well to smooth the wheels as everyone returns to live. So thank you so much for your time, and that's great.